Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Komelasky. I'm an executive director within the strategic feasibility and site and patient access team from PPD. I'm here with John Van Hoy, who is our executive director leading our data science and advanced analytics team within our enterprise data function. We're excited to take part today in the Medidata Next Global Conference to be able to share a perspective around how we think a case for the data democratization within the clinical trial operations landscape and industry has an impact on how we can improve decision making and outcomes. So today, what we'll look to do is share a little bit of background around where we see some industry challenges, how our strategic feasibility team is set up to help deliver and answer questions in that space, what our vision of data democratization looks like and how we're taking some first steps along that pathway, how a data sharing and data modeling kind of labs approach gives us a chance to approach this in a new way, and ultimately how some of the advanced analytics and learnings we can take from that can help shape how we can take some steps forward. So if we think about the landscape that's out there today, according to a 2015 Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Disease Research, looking at how protocols have evolved from 2005 to 2015, we saw a pretty stark growth of an ability for the complexity of protocols to increase. That was kind of evidenced by inclusion and exclusion criteria increasing by 61%, clinical endpoints increasing 25%, study visits increasing another 25%, and the procedures within those studies increasing at a clip of 70%. All of that was driving increased complexity, adding time cost to the overall drug development process. In turn, that has led to increased timelines, increased non-enrolling sites that take place, and it creates different challenges. How we approach that then says that we need to take a more data-driven approach to how we design and implement these programs. As a CRO, we intentionally have structured our approach to be thinking about how our feasibility team and strategic feasibility can help address some of these challenges. We go beyond what people think maybe as traditional feasibility that takes place, that site survey-based feasibility approach in the post-award, to engage with some standard analyses, to embedding, for us as a CRO in the pre-award, but really in that study planning stage, to allow us to take data-driven approaches to help with site identification and selection. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is bring some standard view of analysis of data, thinking about how the enrollment rates, times, and activation forecasts come into play, so we can understand what a timeline looks like, understand how the different competitive landscape, standard of care, regulatory, and patient information all kind of can inform what a strategy and a site and patient view looks like for a program. The underpinning of all of that really anchors to how we're touching some of these data pieces. It starts with our site intelligence and the view of how we can think about using site and investigator data, both internal experience that we have, performance that we have from past programs, complement it and augment it by what we can see externally. The space that has continued to evolve the most is the area of patient data and how we can think about it from the historical de-identified data from claims, prescription data, to some of the more rapidly evolving spaces of EMR, EHR, federated networks of those, to allow us to get more real-time access to identifiable patient information. That's continuing to take steps forward with different labs, genomics, and new ways to have a broader perspective and a deeper perspective of patients. All of that then gets complemented with the landscape data that's out there as well when we look at what else is happening out there that needs to inform and guide our decision making. When we think about some of the data challenges, though, that exist from how we use that data, there's a number of things taking place that create complexity and challenge. There's lack of global coverage of some of this data. There's lack of consistency and standards in terms of how that data is accessible, the formats that they're in to bring it together. There's challenges with data accuracy, quality, and completeness. There's a big component of silos of data, whether that's within an organization or across organizations, duplications of records, limited number of observations that limits how powerful you can make inferences and use that to predict future behavior. And we know that there's an evolving landscape of concerns with data privacy, data use, and security, all things that need to come together for us to be able to effectively make decisions. So that sets the stage for us to think about what does a future vision look like? How can we overcome some of these challenges that are out there? And when we think about the space, one of the things that we think about is this vision of data democratization. And when we talk about that, I think the definition that we'll anchor to is, having an ability so that data is accessible, that data is usable with the least amount of challenge or friction to leverage and access and use that data. That vision is far off when we think about any stakeholder having access to data. There's competitive challenges there. There's other challenges in that space that we need to think about. But the opportunity to take some steps forward towards that vision are there. And part of what we're trying to do is find ways to break down some of those silos. And the first step on here is for partners to come together to share data. We see that as the first step to being able to understand how can we more powerfully use combined data and make better decisions. Our collaboration with the Acorn and Medidata team is an example of how we can bring together two partners, two different data sets, and think about what can we do better together. There's some foundational things that need to come into play in terms of having that standard data model so that you can have like-to-like view of how that data comes together. Similarly, from a master data management, MDM, we have the ability to be able to effectively take information and combine it and know that those records are the same records. So if you have an investigator from this data set and an investigator from another data set, you can combine and get a more complete or holistic picture of either experience or additional features or attributes about them. We know that a big component of data governance needs to be in place to effectively enable some of this data sharing. That helps drive everything from data use, what can you do with it? How is it captured? How is it stored? How is it destroyed? And ultimately, how are we thinking about privacy? What things need to be blinded as things come together to protect any of that information? There needs to be infrastructure in place to allow us to tap into that and be able to share the data more effectively. So data lakes play a role in that. And ultimately, having a mechanism to put some analytics layer on top needs to help power that. When we think about how we've turned that into action here with the Acorn team, we've set up a collaboration that is in the spirit of a labs concept, really meant to be an exploratory path for us to more agilely bring together our data and work through it. So we've brought together our PPD CTMS data as a foundation, as a starting point, with the Acorn operational data sets, predominantly driven from Rave, but from other platforms as well, and be able to go through an aggregation and a shared environment where that data can come together, really with the purpose of being able to do some benchmarking of that data set, understand what does the industry landscape look like, but more importantly, also start being able to do some data modeling on top of it. It gives our data scientists from both organizations a shared space and the freedom to operate, to be able to think and explore how we can build the models to answer the right questions, be able to take some of the, understand what features are contributing to those models, and explore how new data sets can potentially augment or increase the power of what we can do. And then ultimately think about, how can we jointly refine, view, validate some of those models to make more effective decisions down the line. And the collaboration is set up so that we have the ability to leverage a number of the collaboration tools, everything from communication on Slack to some of those analytics spaces within R, H2O, others, that give us a common platform and set of tools to work together. I'll turn over to John now to talk a little bit more about how we've brought this lab's concept forward and some of the learnings that we've had.
Thank you, Chris. This is John Van Hoy. I'm the Executive Director of Data Science at PPD. I'm excited to be here today to talk about our collaboration this year with Acorn. And I'd like to start by talking about the value and the importance of the data asset that we have created together, and how that helps us to address what I like to call the data dimensionality problem that we see when we try to bring machine learning and predictive analytics into the clinical trials domain. To illustrate what I mean by this, I've got a data table on the screen here, which is a conceptual representation of the site level data asset that we've pulled together for modeling. And when I mention data dimensionality problem, I'm really talking about the shape of this data. So the width of the data, but also the height of the data. As far as the width, or how many variables we bring to bear, we tend to capture a lot of information about sites when we work with them. So tend to capture a lot of data, variables, which increases the number of features that are available for modeling. The data dimensionality hurdle, however, comes into play when we think about the height, or the number of records that's in this table. If you make a couple assumptions about the global universe of clinical trial sites, let's assume there's 100,000 investigators globally around the world. And we can also assume conservatively that each one of those sites or investigators has worked on about 3 trials. So that means there's about 300,000, again, just estimating, site level trial observations that we have to pull from for predictive modeling. In the area of data science and machine learning, 300,000 is not a very large number. Many of these machine learning algorithms are designed to account for really millions and millions of records. So 300,000 is just sort of the minimum price of entry. We really want to ensure that before we embark on this process, we try to maximize the ratio, or the amount of that global universe of clinical trials and sites that we can pull into the modeling arena. And the partnership with Acorn has really allowed to reach that maximum level of ratio that we can. Specifically, when we think about the number of unique sites that PPD brings, we already have a formidable list, because of course PPD has executed many site studies over the years. But the Acorn data helps us grow that footprint of unique sites by almost 50%, a 46% increase in the number of unique sites. But perhaps more importantly is a growth in the number of site level observations. So every time we work with a site, we get information about their enrollment performance capability. And the Acorn data has helped us grow the data that we already have by almost 3-fold, which again is a very significant boost to the ability of these models to be successful at predicting clinical trial milestones. Not only do we get more records when we partner with Acorn, but we also get more data variables and further expand the width of this table. To illustrate that, I like to say that the data that we bring and the data that Acorn brings is really complementary and dovetails together. Namely, PPD brings a lot of information about site operations, site activation, regulatory milestones, information about the type of sites that we work with, whether it be their ethics committee type or if they're academic institutions or not. Acorn brings a lot of information, of course, EDC data quality about the sites. They bring a lot of information about those sites' experience because they have more trial experience in the data set. And together, the data is complementary and really bolsters the success that we see when we attempt predictive modeling. To illustrate this point, I've got a couple charts at the bottom, which are for a couple of our key models, relative ranking of the top most important features. What you can see at a high level, when you look at the purple features, which are features that are derived from PPD sourced information, and the green bars, which represent features that are derived from Acorn sourced information, is that there's a good balance. We're both contributing information to the models to help them achieve optimized predictive performance. Another way to say that is that either partner would not have been able to achieve the predictive success that we have collectively if they didn't have the value of the other partner's data. So we think, again, the data dovetails and very complementary. With the growth of the number of observations and the feature space, we really start to get to the point where we can be successful in trying to make predictions of outcomes in the clinical trial space. To be specific and give you some insights about what we have been developing this year with Acorn, I want to talk a little bit about the models that we developed and a little bit about the results that we've seen. We're trying to accomplish two business outcomes with our predictive analytics efforts. Number one is to predict the study enrollment timeline, ultimately. How long is it going to take to activate sites and get patients enrolled? Number two, we want to be able to use the algorithms to recommend which sites would be the best sites to pursue for any given input study protocol. When we look at the first outcome, we separate that into two areas. One, we want to predict site activation milestones. We have 3 milestones that we want to predict and 3 models that align with each of those milestones. We also want to predict at a site level what is the expected enrollment rate. And so we have model M3 that predicts site level enrollment rate. As far as site recommendation, we look to rank sites by expected patient contribution, which really is a reflection of the predictive models M0 through M3 that we've created. Namely, for each site, again, for a study for which we're planning, we can estimate how long they're expected to be open and contributing patients. And if we multiply that by the predicted enrollment rate for that site, we can get an estimate of predicted patient contribution, and we can rank sites according to that list. And what that helps us do, importantly, is identify sites that we think have the potential to be high-performing or high-enrolling sites, but also, equally or maybe more important, identify the sites that we believe are going to be low enrollment contributors for a study. I'll give you a sense about a little bit of the preliminary outcomes that we've seen that are very encouraging. They are encouraging us and make us confident about moving forward and continuing to grow the modeling that we've started with Acorn. Number one, as far as our ability to be accurate in how we predict patient enrollment for a clinical study, we see that compared to our baseline models that we use now to predict key milestones like first site activated, first patient in, LPI, the predictive models we've developed here are about 30% more accurate, or we've reduced the error that we see in predicting those milestones by 30%. As far as the site ranking models, if we take, for one example, a 3-class prediction model, when we looked at the top predicted class, we find that their actual enrollment results or enrollment rate is 2 times higher or more than those sites actually performed that were predicted to be in the lowest class. So that gives us confidence that the model is able to understand and predict high enrollers and low enrollers. And lastly, if we think about optimizing clinical trials with that site recommendation model that we've created, we've done a retrospective hypothetical optimization. We've used very conservative estimates, and we think it would be easy to achieve a reduction of the enrollment timeline by 1 to 1.5 months in some of our key therapy areas, namely neuroscience and oncology. So again, the results are very encouraging. They are enough for us to continue working with Acorn. We're excited about the future of the partnership. We have an exciting roadmap about other data domains and types of data that we can bring into the modeling space. Namely, we're looking at bringing in some of the kind of data that Chris mentioned earlier, real-world data, in-depth information about protocol complexity and protocol characteristics, information about clinical trial congestion across the industry. And we're confident that the addition of more data will only make these models more and more accurate as we move forward. I'd like to thank you for your time. We would like to close this part of the presentation and invite you to join us afterwards for the live Q&A phase. Thank you.
Great. If everyone can just take a quick look in the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A portion of what you're seeing. We have some coming in already, so rest assured we'll get to as many as we can over the time here. If we don't get a chance to cover all of them in this session, please feel free to visit the Innovation Lounge and we can follow up on some of the conversation as well. So we'll take the first question came in from Peter, and there's a question that asks, can you speak to any specific improvement that you've seen internally while working with this data from Acorn? So it's a great question. I think the short answer is yes, we've seen some impact. And I think it's helpful to think about how that can drive impact. I think there needs to be a thoughtful approach to set it up and introduce it to the business to make sure that they can effectively understand what they're seeing and how to use those insights to drive decisions or recommendations. But one quick example would be a phase 3 oncology study that we have recently been working through in the planning and design stage, and it's going to be a large study with a number of countries, number of sites, number of patients, that is pretty expansive. So what the team really wanted to do was understand, what does that landscape look like? How can we use some of this benchmark data to get a sense of, what can we understand beyond what we might have traditionally seen in other data sets? So getting, not just a study level view, but really getting some benchmark performance data at a country level, at a site level. And I think the Acorn data really helped kind of bridge that gap and get visibility at that more granular space to be able to come up with a country site mix and a set of recommendations where there was a lot of confidence that we were able to would be able to deliver kind of the vision for the program. And I think it allowed us to be able to identify some maybe underutilized countries traditionally that would give us a chance to more rapidly drive both startup and the enrollment phases to be able to deliver the program. So those things did come to light, and I think the other aspect of where the data in this example was really valuable was in that site level view as we've looked at both getting, and John touched it a little bit in his update, but it was getting that broader view of where there might be some PPD naive sites that we haven't worked with, but sites that have had strong historical performance, and both, in addition, strong predicted performance for this particular opportunity. So that gave our teams, again, more confidence to say, we can identify the right places to focus and build a strategy that kind of supports with a data-driven lens of how we can take it forward. So I think that's that was a recent example that our teams have been able to kind of bring forward, but it does highlight how you can set up the opportunity to create impact. But I think one of the things that it also just underscores is when you think about doing this and doing this at a more scaled level, the importance that needs to be put on the change management side as well, which is an area that we're going to be continuing to think about is, how do you raise awareness about, what this new data looks like, how to use it, how to position it, and feel confident in the results you're seeing. John, do you want to take the next question?
I think I can kill or hit two birds with one stone. So we have one question. Let's see. Do you think additional data would make your prediction stronger, or what data would be top priority? Another question came in, which is, have you been able to use these predictive models to improve the accuracy of study budget development and management? So I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap. So of course, from the data science perspective, I think the more data, the better, and there's really no end to the amount of data that we would be interested in. We have sort of domains of data that I think about. So we want to get more and more information about protocols, about investigators, and about patients. So with regard to protocols, we're looking into how can we embed information like about trial design or protocol complexity or eligibility criteria, for example. With regard to investigators, could we get information or data about investigators' research habits or their professional networks? With regard to patient data, that's the domain where you would find stuff like real-world data, information or data about site and patient proximity. So that would be a list of the things that are on our roadmap. And a fourth component would be cost data. So sort of a data domain that we haven't addressed fully yet would be clinical trial cost information. And absolutely the answer is yes. We think that, at the very least, having better prediction around enrollment contribution by site would improve site clinical trial budgeting. But the process in place right now is we'll evaluate those different data types or data domains now through the end of the year, assess them with regard to what we think the most valuable drivers are for model accuracy, also assess them with regard to feasibility of acquiring that information. And that will put us in a position where we can move into 2021, moving in parallel, one path, acquiring data and mastering it into our training data. And the other one is one by one going through and evaluating the effect of those different data elements and increases in our features to the model accuracy.
All right, I know we're running out of time. Maybe we can take one last question here, and I think that the question is knowing the space of rare and pediatrics, it can get more complicated. Can these models work in some of those spaces? I think it's a great question. Not only do you see that the landscape driving more and more subpopulations of diseases, more targeted therapies, but that the expansiveness of the rare disease space creates challenges. And I think this is where bringing together data only enhances how we're able to do that. And I think there's some cases where coming together gives us more examples of these to be able to have models that can work in these spaces. I think in certain situations you're going to find there's going to be rare diseases that have never been studied, and there might be we've been exploring different approaches in that space to say how can you create a model that maybe is based on analogs, maybe it's based off of different indication groupings that kind of takes it up a level but gives you enough confidence that these are the right ways to approach it. So it's a great question. I think we're continuing to explore the application of what and how it can be used in those spaces. But I think it's something that will continue to evolve. And I think as more and more data becomes available in some of these areas, there will be more of a kind of that traditional path that we're working on that can be brought in there as well. All right, I think that's all the time we have for now. So we appreciate the engagement, the questions, and the opportunity to take part today. We'll be looking to follow up. If you guys have any additional questions, comments, we'd love to catch up in the Innovation Lounge, or please feel free to reach out to John and I moving forward.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.